Okay, Shashank Srivastava joins us now, Senior Executive Director with Maruti, to talk about where he feels demand trends are, the real impact of yen, and is there recovery in the rural demand. When we spoke last time, we started with how the butter from the bread is missing. But looking at yen prices, which are at a 24-year low, looks like low-fat butter is back. I mean, margins automatically will go higher because metal prices are down and yen is at a 24-year low. Shashank, good morning. Would you like to respond to my question? I mean, last time the butter was missing, but now looking at metal prices and yen, looks like low-fat butter is back.
I don't know. I think only the bread is toasted better, I can say. I don't know about whether the butter is back, because when you look at the commodity prices of today, while they have softened over the last few weeks, especially steel. But when you compare it with what they were 2 years back, they are still, in fact, historically high. For example, steel, which was 38 rupee a kg about 2 years back in May of 2020. Today, even it had gone up to 84, it's now come in that 68, 70 level. So the same is for copper. It was at $5,200, went up to $10,400. It has softened, but still much above that $5,200. Same with aluminium, same with plastics. So I think while there has been an improvement in recent weeks with some softening, however, when you compare with the 2 years back, the pressure because of commodity prices is still high. On the yen factor that you mentioned, yes, the yen has dropped against the dollar drastically, and the rupee also went down against the dollar, but not as much, maybe about 3 or 4%. So I think the yen rupee rate is obviously quite favorable, especially for companies like Maruti Suzuki, where we have a large part of our imports in yen. So in that sense, yes, that is a positive for Maruti Suzuki.
So broadly, our understanding is that 15% of your total cost is in yen, broadly 14-15%. How does the sensitivity work? And the savings what you will that get passed on to the consumers, or that will add up to the balance sheet?
Yeah, so the exact percentage of how much it affects is from maybe my finance guys would be in a better position to tell. I'm not able to tell you the exact numbers here. It's quite a complicated situation because we have tier 1 vendors, tier 2 vendors, tier 3 vendors, etc. However, directionally, it is obviously positive for Maruti Suzuki. And on your question of whether this would get passed on to the consumer, I would say it is unlikely, because remember, when the commodity prices I just mentioned, when you compare with 2 years back, they had gone historically high, and this could not be passed on to the consumers completely. So we did have a price increases, but they were not enough to offset the increases on the cost because of the commodity price increases. In other words, the profitability went down because only part of the increased cost was passed on to the consumers. And the reason why not the full cost was passed on, because remember, we were also emerging from a very bad market disruption because of the COVID. And in any case, 2019-20 was down for the industry for other reasons, including the BS4 to BS6 transition, some financing issues with the banks, etc. So I would say it's highly unlikely that the marginal increases which we have seen because of the yen depreciation or because of the softening of the commodities getting passed on to the consumers.
Shashank, hi, good morning. Aisha as well joining in on the chat. I bet it's a bit of a catch-22 situation for you, right? Because how do you see demand and consumer demand or sentiment actually hold through at a time when you are upping prices? You know, for instance, in the month of May, while your exports were strong, domestic demand was slightly below expectations. So what happens in a scenario like this? Because the consumer is also going to snap at some point, because, you know, inflation is everywhere. So everyone's going to get conscious on their pockets.
Absolutely. And I think, Aisha, what you are referring to is the numbers of actual wholesale and retail. However, we also have to look at the fact that the last 7-8 months, we have seen a very tight supply side situation. So the constraint has really been supply rather than demand. On the demand parameters of both inquiries as well as bookings, it has been stable and strong. In fact, the pending bookings in the industry are at a record high. For Maruti alone, it is about 315,000. Industry, I'm told, is about 550,000 by estimates. So even though, when you say domestic numbers were smaller in May, there were hardly any stock at both the dealerships and certainly not anything in the factory. So that was a supply constraint rather than. So that's wholesale of last month is not a reflection of the actual demand situation. We have pending bookings and the waiting in some models is as high as 8 to 9 months. However, I completely agree with you. Going forward, we have flagged 5 red flags which are possible to disrupt the current demand stability that we see in the industry. And those 5 are, one, of course, the commodity prices, consequent price pressure, the fuel price going up, inflation and interest rates going up, which will impact the economy, which is the third red flag. Fourth is the COVID might come up, although it's still it's not as bad, and probably will the possibility of a disruption as large as we saw a couple of years back may not exist. It still has the capability of disruption. And finally, the semiconductor crisis, which has affected the supply side, it still continues even in this month.
The other thing I want to talk about is that irrespective of all the 5 red flags that you just raised, your stock actually has seen quite a big breakout. It's finally clawed back above that 8,000 mark after a long hiatus, and it's a rip-roaring move on the stock price right now, by the way. Would it be fair to say that the worst could be behind us, or do you still see a lot more pain ahead?
So those 5 red flags are current flags. As you know, from the VUCA world, we have moved to a Bani world, which is about brittle, anxious, non-linear, incomprehensible. So that factor still remains. And certainly predictions for the future are a bit more difficult. We were always cautiously optimistic. And as some people have started saying, that we are more optimistic than cautious. But yes, the threat of inflation, of higher interest rates, or the economy itself is obviously in the ultimate run going to affect the auto industry, including the high fuel prices. So there is a very good correlation historically, not only in India, but across the world in different parts in different countries, of a correlation between the economic growth and the auto volumes. In fact, the correlation is as high as 0.9836, which is a pretty strong R square factor for people who are, who know the correlation mathematics.
The one, I was just going through one of the reports, and Global Brokerage has raised this red flag, saying that they remain cautious and believe that, your model launches are not going to result in a meaningful uptake. Help me understand how the new launches are actually doing.
Yes, so the new launches recently have done extremely well. So we had very recently the launch of the new Celerio, the new Wagonar, the new Ertiga, the new XL6, and now the new Brezza, which we're going to launch on the 30th of this month. Each of them has done actually very well. So Ertiga, of course, there are constraints of supply in both Ertiga, XL6, as also in the new Baleno, the Celerio. So they have done actually extremely well. So I'm not sure whether the statistics supports that assertion of the new models not doing well. And the reason I think why people in the industry are looking at Maruti Suzuki much more positively, with the observation that you began with when you joined this chat, is I think because we have said that we will be launching many new models in the SUV sector. And that is one area where Maruti has been relatively weaker. Our market share in the non-SUV sector is actually at a record high of 67%. Never seen earlier. 20 years back also, it was not that high. So it's only in the SUV segment where which was pulling down our market share below 50. With this new Brezza, which is coming in on the 30th of June, and the other models which we are lining up, which we have mentioned, we are wanting to strengthen our portfolio in SUV. That probably gives the confidence to the market that Maruti's market share should climb from where it is right now.
Good morning. This is Nantal also joining in on the conversation. Maruti, of course, has been a star performer in trade this entire week. There are a lot of tailwinds that are acting for the stock. We're just taking forward from what Aisha was also asking you. So as far as the new launches go, great. But just seeing the consumer sentiment, has there been a change in June for Maruti? Are you seeing more sales already? I know it's the 24th of June, but you would have enough data to tell us if it's maybe far more than May or April?
Yeah, so June, as I've been telling Aisha and also earlier in the program, there is a constraint on the supply side. It was a constraint in May. There is a constraint in June. In June, of course, we have had a 1 week maintenance shutdown, which is further, apart from the semiconductor prices that we have been seeing in the last few months. That so even in June we are supplied. There is a supply constraint. We have 315,000 bookings on the backlog, which indicates that on the demand side there seems to be an okay situation. Of course, as we go along, and I have flagged those 5 red flags which I just mentioned, it is to be seen. But in industry, the expected sale for passenger vehicle is actually about 315 to 325,000 range, which will be about 25% up over last year.
Srivastava, you were just talking about how historically the non-SUV sales 67%. Can you tell us a little more about the kind of consumer insights that you're seeing when it comes to the SUV segment? The larger cars that are coming back in vogue. There's enough that has been also being said about the entry-level cars that are facing pressure, the smaller cars that are facing pressure. Why is it that the bigger cars are doing better?
Yeah, so I think on the SUV front, we have seen a shift in the preference of design for the SUV type of vehicles from the consumer side. Probably the high driving stance, the larger ground clearance, the easy ingress, the usage of the space, the status which goes along with that, with a powerful vehicle, at least in the looks at least. And also broadly because there's been a larger cross consideration from the smaller cars and sedans with the SUVs. Earlier SUVs were people who used to buy SUVs were not the people who used to consider buying hatches or sedan, or people who bought hatches and sedan were not the people who used to consider SUVs. But now we see a lot of cross consideration held also by a lot of price overlap across the segments. So that explains the segment shift from the hatches and the sedans towards the SUVs. As regards the overall market prices going up, of course, it's a reflection also of the increased features and technology which are going into the cars, as also some of the requirements because of meeting regulatory changes regarding emission and safety, like BS4 to BS6, etc. So the average prices have gone up. And also psychologically, I think people after a couple of years are feeling a little freer to spend, and that explains probably a little bit of shift towards the upper end. However, I think you still see the data suggests 47-48% still first-time buyers. The demography of our country is such that you would always have that category of percentage of first-time buyers, and that also explains why the hatches would still continue to be a very big segment as they are. They're actually as large as the SUV segment today in the industry.
Okay, so that's the consumer insight. Now we know why they're preferring bigger to smaller cars. Mr. Srivastava, we interviewed the MD and CEO of Hindustan Unilever a few weeks ago, and he spoke a lot about rural markets degrowth, volumes that are going down because of the pressure on the wallet. If they're buying, less shampoo, soaps, etc., how can they be buying cars? What kind of rural degrowth are you seeing in the smaller towns? in the hinterland. Let's also not forget the kind of action that we're seeing for CNG prices as well. That may also make it difficult for sales in the smaller towns, especially.
Actually, I think there is a clear difference with the FMCG sales when you compare it with the cars itself, because car is like more of a discretionary buy. Sentiments are important, of course, because they can give you a very disproportionate effect on sales. In the our rural sales have actually increased. And the percentage of our overall sales last year itself, they increased about 2% from 41 to 43%. And that, I believe, is because there are two categories within the rural sales, rural segment. One, of course, of the essentials, which are like which is what FMCG is talking about. But there are also a lot of people who have good money even in the rural areas. They are not necessarily, there obviously the disposable income matters, and they will ultimately be affected by inflation. However, at the moment, it looks like the rural for cars is actually gone better over the year. And I've been seeing some data last 15 years, only 1 year when rural growth was less than urban growth. Including last year, the rural growth was faster than the urban growth in cars. And that is because I think you have seen good monsoon. You've seen a record Kharif output. Rabi sowing has been very good. You've seen MSPs going up. So I think the wealthier part of the rural sector would probably have a much more confidence today because of government support as well as because of the regular monsoons and the good crops. So I think there is two sectors within the rural economy, and that explains why some sectors are affected more and others are not so affected.
Srivastava, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. I hope next time when we talk, we'll not talk about bread and butter. We'll talk about parathas and lassi because you come from Delhi.
Certainly. I hope so. Thank you.